The land didn't forgive, and it didn't forget. Walter Hayes had learned that truth the hard way, one failed crop at a time. One winter that came too early and stayed too late. The farm, if you could still call it that, sat at the ass end of the frontier, where the prairie broke against the foothills like waves against rocks that didn't care. 40 acres of stubborn earth that yielded just enough to keep a man alive, but never enough to let him prosper. He stood on his porch that morning, same as every morning, watching the sun climb over the ridge. The coffee in his cup had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Waste wasn't something a man in his position could afford. The house behind him creaked in the wind. It always did. Sarah used to say the house was talking to them, telling stories about the people who'd lived there before. Walter had smiled at that, back when smiling came easier. Now the creaking just reminded him that everything, the boards, the nails, the man himself, was wearing out. Getting philosophical in your old age, he muttered to himself, voice rough from disuse. Living alone did that. Some days he'd go from sunrise to sunset without speaking a word out loud. Some days longer. He walked the property line that afternoon, checking fences that needed checking. The wire had come loose in 3 places, storm last week had knocked a branch down, and the whole section sagged like an old man's spine. Walter had the tools, had the time. Didn't have the strength he used to, but he'd manage. He always did. The work was meditative. Hammer, wire, staple, repeat. His hands knew the rhythm, even if his back protested. He was 2 posts in when he felt it, that prickle at the back of his neck. The sensation of being watched. Walter didn't turn around fast. Fast movements were for young men and fools, and he wasn't either anymore. He straightened slow, wiped his forehead with his sleeve, let his eyes scan the tree line casual-like. Nothing moved. The cottonwoods stood silent, their leaves still in the windless afternoon. "Getting paranoid too," he said to the fence post, but the feeling didn't leave. 3 miles into the forest, Ronan Creed sat motionless against a ponderosa pine, watching through field glasses that had seen better decades. His hands were steady, always had been, even now with the arthritis creeping into his knuckles like slow-moving rust. Walter looked older. Well, they both did. 30 years had a way of doing that. Ronan lowered the glasses and rubbed his eyes. The cabin behind him, invisible from any trail, had been home longer than most places he'd ever stayed. Longer than anywhere, actually. 32 years in these woods. 32 years of watching. Some men might have called it obsession. Ronan called it penance. The fire in his small stove had gone out hours ago. He should restart it. Nights were getting cold again, fall coming in hard this year, but he didn't move, just sat there, thinking about the time Sarah had laughed at something he'd said. Couldn't even remember what it was now, just the sound of it. Like bells, like water. "You're a damn fool," he told himself. The forest didn't argue. Walter finished the fence as the sun started its descent. His back screamed at him, but the wire was tight and the posts were solid. It'd hold. For a while, anyway. He was gathering his tools when he saw the dust. East Ridge. Still a ways off, but coming this direction. Riders. Multiple. Walter's jaw tightened. Visitors were rare out here, and the rare ones were rarely good news. He hoisted his toolbox and started back toward the house, pace steady. Running wouldn't help, never did. By the time he reached the porch, he could make out the shapes. 6 horses. 7 men, one of them riding double. They weren't hurrying, which somehow made it worse. Men in a hurry might just be passing through. Men taking their time had intentions. Walter set the toolbox down careful and quiet. Went inside. Retrieved the shotgun from above the door. Old Remington, still reliable. Checked the loads, both barrels ready. He brought it back outside but didn't point it at anyone. Just held it loose in the crook of his arm, leaning against the porch rail like he'd been expecting company. The riders crested the small rise and pulled up about 30 yards from the house. Close enough to talk, far enough to scatter if shooting started. Professional distance. The man in front sat easy in his saddle, hat tilted back, face all sharp angles and cold calculation. Mid-40s, maybe. Hard to tell with the kind of wear that came from hard living. His coat was good quality but dusty, gun belt oiled and cared for. This wasn't some drifter. This was someone who'd made a career out of being dangerous. "Afternoon," the man said. Pleasant voice. Wrong kind of pleasant. Walter nodded, didn't speak. Name's Gideon Rusk. These are my associates. Rusk gestured to the men behind him without looking. Hot day for fence work. Fence needed working. I'm sure it did. Rusk leaned forward slightly, saddle leather creaking. Pretty isolated out here. Man could have trouble, and nobody'd know for days. Man could. Not neighborly, living so far from neighbors. Suits me. Rusk smiled. It didn't touch his eyes. Direct. I appreciate that. So let me be direct too. This is nice land, water rights, timber access. My employer's interested in acquiring property in this region. Land's not for sale. Didn't say he wanted to buy it. The words hung there in the air between them. One of the riders behind Rusk shifted in his saddle, nervous energy looking for an outlet. Walter's eyes flicked to him briefly. Young, maybe 25, hand too close to his pistol. You're trespassing, Walter said. Quiet, factual. That a problem for you, old man? It's a fact. Rusk's smile widened a fraction. See, that's where we have a philosophical difference. My employer believes facts are negotiable, fluid things, subject to interpretation, and occasionally persuasion. Your employer sounds like an asshole. That got a laugh from one of the other riders, a big man with a scar running from his ear to his collar. Rusk shot him a look, and the laughter died. You live alone out here? Rusk asked. That's another fact. No family, no hands, just me. Shame. Man your age should have sons to help with the work. People to... Rusk paused, picking his words like selecting ammunition. Look after him. Make sure nothing unfortunate happens. Walter's grip on the shotgun tightened just slightly. I manage. For now. The big man with the scar nudged his horse forward a few steps. Boss, we wasting time talking to this fossil? Place is barely worth taking. Everything's worth taking, Dalton, Rusk said without looking at him. It's just a matter of understanding leverage. Leverage, Walter repeated. That your employer's word too? That's my word. And here's another one. Inevitable. What's coming is inevitable, Mr. Hayes. You can accept it with grace, or you can make it difficult. But the outcome doesn't change. You know my name? We know lots of things. Walter absorbed that. They'd done research. This wasn't random. This was planned. The realization settled into his chest like cold water. How long do I have? Walter asked. Rusk tilted his head, genuinely curious. Have? Before your employer wants an answer. Oh, we're not looking for an answer, Mr. Hayes. We're delivering information. Call it a courtesy warning. Things are changing out here. The frontier's getting civilized, whether it wants to or not. Men like you. He gestured at the worn house, the sagging barn, the fields that hadn't yielded a decent harvest in 3 years. You're the past, and the past doesn't have a vote. Eloquent. I read books. Try reading a law book, one that covers property rights. Law's a long way from here, old man, and it travels slow. One of the other riders, thin face, nervous eyes, spoke up. Gideon, maybe we should... Shut up, Carver! The thin-faced man closed his mouth so fast his teeth clicked. Rusk straightened in his saddle, gathering his reins. We'll be back, Mr. Hayes, soon. And when we come back, we'll expect you to have thought things through, weighed your options, considered what's best for your continued health. I'm 63, Walter said. Health's already questionable. Could get more questionable. Could. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Rusk touched his hat brim, mock courtesy, and turned his horse. Gentlemen, he said to his men, let's let Mr. Hayes get back to his fence work. The riders turned, casual and coordinated, like they'd done this dance before. But as they started away, one of them glanced back. Not the young nervous one or the big scarred one. Different man, older. Rode in the middle of the pack, hadn't said a word the whole time. When his eyes met Walter's, there was something there. Recognition, maybe. Or memory. Then they were gone, riding back over the rise, dust settling in their wake. Walter stood on his porch until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then he stood there longer, shotgun heavy in his hands, while the sun continued its descent and the shadows grew longer across his land. Finally, he went inside. Set the shotgun back in its place. sat down at the kitchen table that Sarah used to set for two and now only ever had one plate, one cup, one set of worn silverware. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from anger. Pure, distilled, useless anger at a world that couldn't just let an old man finish out his days in peace. He made himself coffee, drank it, watched through the window as evening came on. And in the forest, Ronan Creed watched too, field glasses trained on the house, counting the riders as they disappeared over the eastern ridge. 6 visible, 7 total. He'd caught the 7th when they first arrived, hanging back, staying in the pack. But it was the older one that made Ronan's blood run cold. He'd only seen the man's profile for a second, but a second was enough. Caleb Stroud. Ronan lowered the glasses slowly. His hands were shaking now, and it wasn't arthritis. Caleb Stroud. Here. After 30 years. Can't be, he whispered. But it was. He'd recognized that profile anywhere. Same lean build, same way of sitting a horse, same man who'd put 3 bullets in Ronan's back and left him for dead in a canyon that should have been his grave. Ronan stood up, knees protesting. His heart was hammering in a way it hadn't in decades. All those years of staying hidden, staying quiet, staying invisible. And now this. Now Caleb riding onto Walter's land with a gang of killers. This wasn't about the property. Property was just the excuse. Walter wasn't the target, he was the bait. And Ronan had spent 30 years making sure nothing happened to that old widower in the house. He'd be damned if he'd stop now. Walter didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the window, shotgun across his lap, watching the darkness. The moon was 3/4 full, throwing enough light to see shapes if anyone approached. Nobody did. The house creaked around him. Old sounds, familiar sounds. The wind picked up around midnight, rattling the shutters Sarah had painted blue once upon a time. The paint was peeling now. Everything peeled eventually. He thought about her. Couldn't help it. Sarah with her dark hair and quick laugh, and the way she'd touch his arm when she wanted his attention. Sarah who'd chosen him over Ronan Creed, chosen safety over excitement, chosen a future that could be counted in seasons and harvests instead of gunfights and graves. She'd never regretted it. She'd told him that near the end. Lying in that same bed upstairs, wasting away from the fever that no doctor could cure, she'd taken his hand and said, "I chose right, Walter. I chose right." He'd believed her, still did. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, he wondered what she'd thought about on quiet nights. Whether she ever looked out at those trees and wondered if Ronan was still alive somewhere. Whether she'd felt that same prickle of being watched. Walter shook his head. Old man's thoughts. Useless. Dawn came slow, bleeding red across the eastern sky. Walter made coffee, forced himself to eat some bread, went outside to check the perimeter. Everything looked the same as yesterday. The fence he'd repaired held. The barn still leaned to the left. The fields still produced nothing worth bragging about. Normal. All normal. Except for the knowledge that men with guns would be coming back. He spent the morning doing small tasks. Oiled the shotgun. Checked the load on the pistol he kept in the drawer. Old Colt. Reliable but not fast. He wasn't fast anymore anyway. Age had taken that along with his knees and his back and his certainty about most things. Around noon he saw movement at the tree line. Not the riders. Different. A man on foot walking out of the forest like he had every right to be there. Walking toward the house. Walking slow, hands visible, no weapon drawn. Walter grabbed the shotgun and stepped onto the porch. The man kept coming. He was big, must have been 6'3", 6'4", with shoulders that suggested he'd done hard work his whole life. Gray beard, wild and untrimmed, gray hair pulled back, clothes that had seen better years, and eyes. Walter's breath caught. Those eyes. Jesus Christ, Walter whispered. Ronan Creed stopped 20 feet from the porch. Close enough to talk. Close enough for Walter to see the lines in his face, the scars on his hands, the weight of 3 decades in the set of his shoulders. "Hello, Walter," Ronan said, voice like gravel, voice that Walter hadn't heard since before Sarah said yes, since before the wedding, since before Ronan had disappeared into the wilderness like smoke. Walter couldn't speak, just stared. "I know this is..." Ronan paused, searching for words. "Unexpected." "You're dead," Walter's voice came out strangled. Common misconception. People said, everyone said you were dead, killed in a dispute out past the territories. People say lots of things. Walter's grip on the shotgun had gone white-knuckled. How long? How long what? How long have you been out there, in those trees? Ronan looked at him for a long moment, then quietly. Long time. How long, Ronan? Since she got sick. The words hit Walter like a physical blow. Since she got sick. That was before the end. That was when Sarah was still alive, still fighting, still... You were there? When... I was there. Ronan's voice was steady. I heard you calling for the doctor. Heard when he said there was nothing he could do. Heard... He stopped, swallowed. Heard everything. Why didn't you say something? Wasn't my place. She'd made her choice. You'd made yours. I respected that. Respected. Walter laughed, but it came out broken. You watched from the trees and called it respect? I called it what it was. Penance. For what? For everything I wasn't. Walter set the shotgun down, leaning it against the rail. His hands were shaking again, but different this time. You've been out there 30 years, watching, guarding. Yes. Why are you here now? Because the men who came yesterday aren't here about the land. That brought Walter up short. What? They're here because of me. One of them, anyway. Old business I thought was buried. I don't understand. You don't need to. You just need to leave. This is my home. It's a trap, Walter, and you're the bait. Then we both leave. No. Ronan, I spent 30 years keeping you safe from a distance. I'm not going to stop now just because they flushed me out. Walter stared at him. At this ghost, this legend, this man who'd loved Sarah enough to disappear, but not enough to actually leave. What happened to you? What did they do? Ronan's hand went to his side, unconscious gesture. Caleb Stroud, one of the men riding with that group yesterday. He and I had a disagreement 30 years ago about how certain spoils should be divided. He resolved it by shooting me in the back and leaving me in a canyon. But you lived. Barely. Spent 6 months learning to walk again. By the time I could ride, I'd heard Sarah had married you, heard you'd moved out here. And He trailed off. You followed. I wanted to make sure she was safe, that's all. Just make sure. And you stayed. I stayed. Walter sank down onto the porch steps. His legs had given out, and he didn't fight it. This is insane. All of it. Yes. Why would Stroud come back now, after 30 years? Because men like him never forget, and they never forgive. Ronan moved closer, stopped at the bottom step. He knows I'm alive. Has to. Otherwise, why come here? Why now? Maybe it really is about the land. It's never about the land. They sat in silence for a moment, two old men processing impossible truths. Finally, Walter spoke. What do? We don't do anything. You pack what matters and ride to town. I stay here and end this. You'll die. Probably. Then I stay too. Walter, it's my land, Ronan, my home. The last thing Sarah and I built together. I'm not running from it. Ronan's jaw tightened. Stubbornness doesn't stop bullets. Neither does 30 years of penance. They locked eyes. Two men who'd loved the same woman, who'd chosen different paths, who'd somehow ended up here, now, with old sins coming home to roost. You can't shoot worth a damn anymore, Ronan said finally. I manage. I watched you at target practice last month. You missed the fence post from 15 feet. Walter felt his face flush. You watch that? I watch everything. That's disturbing. That's dedication. Despite everything, despite the impossibility of the situation, despite the danger, despite 3 decades of absence, Walter felt a laugh building in his chest. It came out rusty, unpracticed, but real. This is the stupidest conversation I've ever had, he said. Same. We're going to die, aren't we? Ronan considered the question seriously. Odds aren't good. Better together than apart? Marginally. Walter stood up, knees protesting, extended his hand. Then I guess we'd better figure out a plan. Ronan looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he took it. His grip was strong, calloused, familiar in a way Walter couldn't quite place. First thing, Ronan said, we need to know how many we're really dealing with. I counted 7 yesterday, but there could be more. The leader was Rusk, professional, smart, won't underestimate us. Good. Underestimating gets you killed. What about Stroud? Ronan's face went hard. Stroud's mine. That personal? 3 bullets in the back makes it personal. Walter nodded. Fair enough. What else? The young one? Nervous hands? He'll panic first. That could work for us or against us. The big one with the scar? Dalton. He'll be brutal but predictable, likes hurting things. You can tell that from watching through field glasses? I've known 100 men like him. They're all the same. They spent the next hour planning. Ronan had knowledge of the land that Walter didn't. Angles, positions, natural cover that 30 years of observation had mapped out. Walter knew the buildings, the structures, where supports were weak and where they were strong. If they come during the day, Ronan said, sketching in the dirt with a stick, they'll approach from the east again. It's the easiest route, and Rusk strikes me as efficient. What if they come at night? Then we're in trouble. But I don't think they will. Rusk wants this clean. Wants to be able to ride away and claim self-defense or squatters' rights or whatever legal fiction his employer has constructed. Awful lot of assuming. You got better ideas? Walter thought about it. No. Then we work with what we have. As the sun climbed toward noon, they prepared. Ammunition counted and distributed. Water stored in useful locations. Sight lines cleared. It was methodical work, almost calming in its familiarity, like preparing for a storm, except storms didn't shoot back. Can I ask you something? Walter said during a water break. Depends. Did she know about you being out there? Ronan was quiet for a long time, then, I think so. Near the end, she looked out at the trees different, like she knew someone was listening. Did you ever think about coming to the door? Every day. Why didn't you? Because she chose you, Walter. She chose the life you could give her, and that choice deserved respect, deserved honor. Me showing up would have been, he struggled for the word, selfish. Or kind. No, kind would have been leaving entirely. I was too weak for that. Walter absorbed this. She loved you. You know that, right? Even after. She never said it, but I knew. She loved you more. Different, not more. Different. Ronan looked at him, really looked. You're a better man than I gave you credit for. I'm a man who's about to get shot defending a failing farm. I don't know if that qualifies as better. Qualifies as brave. Or stupid. Sometimes they're the same thing. They worked through the afternoon. By the time evening came, the farm looked the same as it always did. Run down, barely holding on, forgettable. But underneath, it was a maze of prepared positions, cached weapons, calculated angles. How long do we wait? Walter asked as they sat on the porch, watching the sun descend. They'll come when they're ready. Could be tomorrow. Could be a week. I don't have a week's worth of patience left. None of us do. Ronan stood, stretched. His joints popped like gunfire. I should get back to the tree line before dark. If they're watching, they can't know we're working together. You could stay in the house. Not yet. Ronan? Not yet, Walter. Walter nodded. Understood. Some distances took longer to cross than others. Ronan started toward the trees, then stopped. Turned back. If this goes bad, it'll go bad. When it goes bad, I need you to promise me something. What? If I go down first, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Just run. That your promise or mine? Both. Then it's a lie on both counts. Ronan almost smiled. Almost. Figured as much. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. Like the last 30 years had just been Walter's imagination. A ghost story he'd told himself to make the loneliness bearable. But the disturbed earth where they'd been planning was real. The redistributed ammunition was real. The knowledge that tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, men would come to kill them. That was real too. Walter went inside as full dark settled. Made dinner he didn't eat. Sat by the window with the shotgun across his lap. And waited. In the forest, Ronan did the same. watching, guarding, preparing for the fight he'd somehow always known would come, because the past never stayed buried, and men like Caleb Stroud never forgot. 3 days passed like held breath. Walter maintained his routine, or tried to. Morning coffee on the porch, fence checks that didn't need checking, repairs that were really just excuses to stay outside where he could see the ridge. But his hands found reasons to stay near the shotgun, and his eyes kept drifting to the tree line where he knew Ronan was watching. The waiting was its own kind of violence. On the 4th morning, Walter woke to find a dead rabbit on his porch, skinned, cleaned, wrapped in cloth. No note, didn't need one. He cooked it for breakfast, and it was the best meal he'd had in weeks. Made him angry, somehow. That Ronan had been out there all this time, close enough to leave food, close enough to help, but too stubborn or too broken to just knock on the door. Pride, Walter muttered, chewing. Gets everyone killed eventually. But he ate every bite. Around noon he heard horses again. Not from the east this time. From the north, coming down the old lumber road that hadn't seen traffic in 5 years. Different approach. Tactical. Rusk was smarter than Walter had hoped. He counted 4 riders this time, not the full group. Advance party, maybe. Testing. Probing. Walter stepped out onto the porch, shotgun in hand, but not raised. Tried to look like a man interrupted during his daily routine. Not a man who'd spent 4 days preparing for war. The riders came on slow, spread out wider than last time, covering more angles. Rusk wasn't with them. The leader was the big one, Dalton. The man with the scar sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, and his grin showed too many teeth. "Old man," Dalton called out when they were 30 yards off. "You alone today?" "Always alone." "That's sad. Man your age should have company." "I manage," Dalton laughed. It was an ugly sound. "You keep saying that, like it means something." The other 3 riders fanned out without being told. Practiced. They'd done this before. Walter tracked them with his peripheral vision, trying not to be obvious about it. One moving toward the barn, one angling for the well, the third staying mounted but drifting left toward the fence line. Flanking positions. "Mr. Rusk sent us to check on you," Dalton said. "See if you'd had time to reconsider his generous offer." Wasn't an offer, was a threat. Semantics. Facts. Dalton's grin widened. "You got a mouth on you for someone in your position. I like that. Shows spirit. Of course, spirit don't stop bullets, but still, I appreciate the effort." One of the other riders, a lean man with a face like a hatchet, called out from near the barn. "Building's empty, Dalton. Just old tools and rot." "Check the house," Dalton said, not taking his eyes off Walter. "That's private property," Walter said. "So's the barn. So's the land you're standing on. But that's about to change, see? That's the whole point of this visit. Helping you understand the new reality." The lean man dismounted and started toward the house. Walter's grip tightened on the shotgun. "I wouldn't," he said. "You wouldn't what?" "Wouldn't send him in there." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "That a threat, old man?" "It's advice." "See? Now you got me curious." Dalton gestured to the lean man. "Check it out, Silas. Our friend here seems protective of his hospitality." Silas climbed the porch steps, boots heavy on the old wood. He reached for the door handle. The shot came from the tree line. Not loud, just a crack that could have been a branch breaking if you didn't know better. Silas's hat flew off his head, spinning through the air. He froze, hands still outstretched, processing what had just happened. A hole in the door frame 6 inches from his skull. Fresh splinters. Smoking. "Next one's not a warning," Ronan's voice carried across the distance. Rough, calm, absolutely certain. Dalton's horse spooked, and he fought it under control. The other riders drew their weapons but had no target. Just forest. Just shadows. "Who the hell?" Another shot. This one kicked up dirt between Dalton's horse's front hooves. The animal reared and Dalton nearly lost his seat. "You're trespassing," Ronan called out. "Mount up and ride away, or the next shots find meat." Dalton got his horse settled, face purple with rage. "You got a friend in the trees, old man?" "Got property rights," Walter said. "Same thing. Property rights," Dalton spat. "You think some backwoods sniper changes the math here?" "Changes it enough." Silas had already scrambled off the porch, diving behind a water trough. The man near the well had taken cover behind the stone structure. Only the one by the fence line held his position, gun drawn but wavering. Dalton's jaw worked. He was doing the calculation. 4 men, exposed positions, unknown shooter in elevated cover. Bad odds. Not impossible, but bad. "This ain't over," Dalton said. "Never thought it was. We'll be back, with more men, more guns, and your friend in the trees won't be enough." "Maybe, maybe not." Dalton yanked his reins hard, wheeling his horse around. "Silas! Carver! Mount up!" The men scrambled for their horses. Silas kept low, moving fast. The one by the fence line, Carver, was already riding hard for the ridge. They regrouped 20 yards out, bunched tight, using each other for cover. Dalton looked back at Walter one more time. "You just made this personal. Wasn't personal before?" "No, before it was business. Now?" His grin was gone, replaced by something colder. "Now it's a matter of pride." They rode off fast, not bothering with the casual confidence from before. Walter watched until they disappeared over the northern ridge, dust settling in their wake. Then he let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Ronan emerged from the trees 5 minutes later, rifle slung over his shoulder. He moved down the slope careful, eyes still scanning for threats. "You hurt?" he asked when he reached the porch. "No, you?" "I'm fine." Walter looked at the bullet hole in his doorframe. "Hell of a shot. Wasn't that hard. 20 yards, clear sight line." "You could have killed him." "Could have. Didn't want to yet." "Why not?" Ronan sat down on his porch steps, grunting with the effort. His knees clearly hurt. "Because killing one of them makes the rest commit. Right now, they're still debating how much trouble we're worth. We start dropping bodies, that debate ends. They'll come back with more men anyway." "True. But now we know how they operate, how they move, how they panic." Silas panicked. They all did. Even Dalton, under the bluster. That's useful information. Walter sat down next to him. 2 old men on a porch, reviewing a gunfight like it was fence work. "How many do you think they'll bring next time?" "All of them. Maybe more." "How many is that?" "At least 10. Possibly 15. "Against 2. "Against 2 old men with bad knees and worse odds, yes." They sat in silence for a moment. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals. Hunting. "We could still run," Walter said. "Could. But we won't." "No." "Why not?" Ronan looked at him. "You really asking that?" Walter thought about it. About Sarah's grave on the hill behind the house, marked with a simple stone he'd carved himself. About 30 years of mornings watching the sun rise over these fields. About the life he and Sarah had built here, small and quiet in theirs. "No," he said finally. "Guess I'm not." "Good. Because running just means dying tired. That's bleak. That's accurate." A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of pine and dust. Walter closed his eyes and let it wash over him. "Tell me about Stroud," he said. Ronan stiffened. "What about him?" "What happened? Really happened?" "I told you, he shot me, left me to die." "Before that, what led to it?" Ronan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "We ran together for 5 years. Stroud, me, a few others. We weren't outlaws exactly, more like fixers. People hired us to solve problems that couldn't be solved legal. Mercenaries. If you want a fancy word for it." "What kind of problems?" "The kind that involved violence. We were good at violence." Walter absorbed that. "And?" "And one day we got hired to retrieve something. Documents. Financial records that could ruin some cattle baron in Wyoming. We found them. Found a lot of cash in the same safe. You disagreed about the split. Stroud wanted it all. Said the documents were worthless to us, that the real payday was the cash. I said we honored the contract. Took what we were hired to take and left the rest." "Principled thievery." Ronan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Something like that." He didn't agree. "He waited until we were riding through Red Canyon, ambush country. Shot me 3 times, backside, shoulder. Left me bleeding in the rocks and took everything." "How'd you survive?" "Stubbornness. And a prospector who found me 2 days later, patched me up enough to get to a doctor, Took me 6 months to heal, another year to track down what happened to Stroud. And? And by then I'd heard about Sarah marrying you, heard you'd moved out here, and He trailed off. You what? I realized I was chasing the wrong thing. Revenge wouldn't give me back what I'd lost. Wouldn't make me the kind of man Sarah had needed, so I stopped chasing. But you came here. I came to make sure she was safe, that's all. Just make sure. And you stayed for 30 years. I stayed because leaving would have meant not knowing, and not knowing would have been worse than the loneliness. Walter let that settle. Did you ever see him again, Stroud? No. Heard rumors over the years that he'd gone west, that he'd hired on with various outfits, but never confirmed anything until 4 days ago when he rode onto your property. You're sure it was him? I'd know him in the dark at 100 yards. What do you think he wants? Ronan's jaw tightened. Me? Same as I want him. Old business finishing itself. After 30 years? Some business doesn't expire. They heard horses again around dusk, not approaching, passing by, maybe half a mile to the east. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to know they were being circled, scouted. They're mapping the terrain, Ronan said, watching from the porch, planning their approach. How long before they move? Soon, Dalton will want to restore his pride. Rusk will want to maintain control. That tension will force them to act before they're fully ready. How do you know? Because I've been both men, the hothead and the planner, and I've seen how that dynamic plays out. Walter checked the shotgun again. It was loaded, had been loaded for days, but checking gave his hand something to do. You scared? Ronan asked. Terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. I was sharp 30 years ago. Now I'm just old and scared. Old and scared's better than young and stupid, is it? We'll find out. As full dark settled, they moved inside. Ronan had resisted at first, old habits dying hard, but Walter had insisted. If they come tonight, I need you close, not out in the trees playing ghost. So they sat at the kitchen table, the one Sarah used to set with care, and they ate a spare dinner of beans and hard bread. Not talking much, just existing in the same space, listening to the night sounds, the creaking house, the wind in the eaves. She made good bread, Ronan said quietly. Walter looked up. What? Sarah, her bread was always perfect, light, warm. You remember that? I remember everything. Walter set down his spoon. That must be exhausting. It is. They cleared the dishes together. Ronan moved around the kitchen like he knew where things went. Probably did, from watching. The thought should have been disturbing, but Walter was too tired for disturbed. Take the bedroom, Walter said. I'll watch first shift. That's your room. It's a bed. Use it. Walter, don't argue with me about hospitality in my own house, Ronan. You've been sleeping on the ground for 30 years. Take the damn bed. Ronan opened his mouth, closed it, finally nodded. He climbed the stairs slow, favoring his left leg. Old wound, probably. The house held his weight, but barely. Everything here was barely holding together. Walter positioned himself by the downstairs window, shotgun across his lap, and settled in for the long watch. The moon was near full again, throwing silver light across the property. He could see the barn's silhouette, the fence line, the tree line beyond. Somewhere out there, men were planning how to kill them. And somewhere up those stairs, a ghost was sleeping in Sarah's bed. Walter almost laughed. The absurdity of it all. Around midnight, he heard Ronan come back down, moving quiet despite his size. Can't sleep? Walter asked without turning. Never been good at it. Ronan pulled up a chair next to him. They sat together, watching the night. You know, Walter said eventually, she talked about you sometimes. Ronan went very still. Did she? Not often, but sometimes. Usually when we'd see someone ride past. Young gun, full of confidence. She'd say, he reminds me of someone I used to know. Never said your name, didn't need to. What else? She said you were the bravest man she'd ever met, and the most lost. She wasn't wrong. She said if things had been different, if you'd been different, maybe it could have worked. But things weren't different. No. Ronan rubbed his face, suddenly looking every one of his years. I would have gotten her killed. The life I lived. The things I did. She knew it. That's why she chose you. She chose life over death. Can't fault her for that. I don't. Never did. They lapsed back into silence, comfortable somehow. Two men who should have been enemies, sitting watch together. When this is over, Ronan said, assuming we survive, big assumption. What will you do? Walter considered it. Probably fix the fence again. Plant next season's crop, same as always. That's it? That's it. Doesn't sound like much. It's enough. Ronan nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. What about you? What'll you do? Hadn't thought about it. Liar. A smile ghosted across Ronan's face. Maybe I'd try coming to the door, instead of watching from the trees. Door's always been open. Not always. For the last 4 days it has been? Ronan looked at him. Really looked. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. Too old for that nonsense. The night deepened around them. An owl called from somewhere in the woods. Hunting sounds. Natural sounds. They took turns sleeping in 2-hour shifts. When dawn came, they were both exhausted but alert. The kind of tired that sharpens instead of dulls. Walter made coffee. Ronan checked the perimeter. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Today, Ronan said when he came back inside. You sure? They've had enough time to plan. Dalton's pride won't let him wait longer. And Stroud, he paused. Stroud knows I'm here now. He'll want to finish what he started. Will he come himself? He'll have to. This isn't about the land anymore. It's about us. Walter poured them both coffee. They drank it standing up, looking out the window at the empty ridge. I'm sorry, Walter said. For what? That it came to this, that they used my land to flesh you out. Not your fault. Feels like it should be someone's fault. Usually is, just not always who you think. They spent the morning preparing final positions. Ronan on the second floor with his rifle, covering the approaches. Walter downstairs with the shotgun, guarding the entry points. Ammunition distributed. Water stored. Escape routes identified, though neither of them planned to use them. Around noon, the wind shifted, coming from the east now, carrying dust and distance. They're moving, Ronan called down from upstairs. Walter's heart kicked in his chest. How many? Can't tell yet, but it's all of them. I can feel it. Feel it? Old instinct. Never goes away. Walter positioned himself by the window, shotgun ready. His hands were steady now. The waiting was over. That was almost a relief. The first rider appeared on the ridge 15 minutes later. Then another. Then 5 more. They spread out along the high ground, backlit by the sun, making themselves visible, making a statement. 12, Ronan called down. No, 13, one hanging back. Stroud? Can't tell, but probably. Rusk rode forward alone, stopping at the same 30-yard mark as before. He sat his horse calm, hands visible. Mr. Hayes, he called out, let's talk like reasonable men. Walter stepped onto the porch. You bring 13 guns to a conversation? Insurance. Your friend in the trees made that necessary. He's not my friend. Liar. Walter almost smiled. Fair. Rusk dismounted, slow, deliberate, showing he wasn't reaching for weapons. This doesn't have to end in blood. Seems like it does, though. Only if you force it. My employer's offer still stands. You leave peacefully, you get compensated. Everyone walks away. Except I don't have anywhere to walk to. That's not my problem. Sure seems like you're making it your problem. Rusk's jaw tightened. I'm trying to give you an out, old man. Take it. And if I don't? Then we take the land anyway, just with less courtesy. From upstairs, Ronan's voice was soft but clear. The one in the back. Third from the left. That's Stroud. Walter's eyes flicked to the ridge. Found the figure, lean build, sitting his horse like he had all day, watching. You know what this is really about? Walter called to Rusk. Enlighten me. Old sins, old debts, the kind that don't settle easy. Rusk's expression flickered. Confusion, maybe. Or recognition. What are you talking about? Ask Stroud. He knows. For the first time, Rusk looked uncertain. He glanced back at his men, found the one Walter had identified. Some silent communication passed between them. Stroud nudged his horse forward, rode down slow, stopping next to Rusk. When he spoke, his voice carried across the distance, cold and flat. Hello, Ronan. From upstairs, silence. Then, Caleb? Stroud smiled. It was a terrible expression. 30 years. I figured you were dead. Disappointed? Professionally inconvenienced. I did shoot you 3 times. 4. You missed 1. My mistake. I'll correct it today. Rusk looked between them, pieces clicking together. You two have history. Ancient history, Stroud said. But history doesn't stay buried, not when there's unfinished business. This is personal? Rusk's voice had an edge now. You brought me into a personal vendetta? I brought you to acquire land. What happens during the acquisition is incidental. Incidental? Rusk's horse shifted, picking up its rider's tension. You used me. I used resources. You're a resource. The other riders were watching now, sensing the fracture. Dalton had his hand on his gun, but he looked confused, like the script had changed and nobody'd told him. Here's what's going to happen, Stroud said, still looking at the house. Ronan's going to come out. We're going to settle our business, and then we take the land. And if he doesn't come out, Walter asked, then we burn him out. Through me. Through whatever's necessary. Walter felt Ronan moving upstairs, coming down. He wanted to tell him to stop, to stay in position, but the words wouldn't come. Ronan appeared in the doorway behind him, rifle in hand, face set. Caleb, he said. Stroud's smile widened. There you are. Thought you'd gone soft, hiding in the trees all these years. Wasn't hiding, was waiting. For what? For you to make a mistake. And have I? You came here. That's mistake enough. The tension ratcheted tighter. Men on the ridge shifting in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. Rusk backing his horse up a few steps, getting clear of the kill zone. Last chance, Stroud said. Put down the rifle. Walk out here. We settle this clean. Nothing about this is clean. No, but it can be quick. Ronan's grip tightened on the rifle. Walter could feel him thinking, weighing options, calculating odds. If I come out there, Ronan said, Walter goes free. No repercussions, no taking the land. Stroud shrugged. Sure? Why not? You're lying. Probably, but you'll come anyway. Why would I do that? Because you've spent 30 years protecting that old man and his dead wife's memory. You're not going to stop now just to save yourself. Ronan went very still. You don't know anything about it. I know enough. I know you're predictable. Noble. That's always been your weakness. Walter put his hand on Ronan's arm. Gentle. Don't. Have to. No, you don't. Yes, I do. Ronan, it's the only way this ends without them burning everything. Walter's grip tightened. Then we fight. We die. Maybe that's better than surrendering. Ronan looked at him. And in that look was 30 years of watching, guarding, protecting. 30 years of penance and loneliness and love that had nowhere to go. No, Ronan said quietly. You get to live. That's the deal. There is no deal. He's lying. I know, but I'm going anyway. He started toward the door. Walter grabbed his arm harder. Don't you walk out there. Don't you dare. Let go, Walter. No. Let go. Make me. They stood there, 2 old men locked in a grip that was part restraint and part embrace. Outside, Stroud was laughing. Touching, he called. But we're on a schedule. Ronan pulled free. Gentle, but firm. I'm sorry. For what? For not coming to the door sooner. Then he stepped outside, rifle still in hand, and started down the porch steps toward the waiting guns. Walter raised the shotgun and fired both barrels into the air. The blast shattered the moment. Horses reared. Men shouted. Stroud's hand went to his gun, and Rusk's mount spun in a panic circle. Ronan froze on the bottom step. Nobody's surrendering, Walter said, voice steady despite his racing heart. He broke the shotgun open, ejected the spent shells, reloaded with hands that had done this 1,000 times. Not today. Not to you. Stroud fought his horse under control, eyes blazing. Old man, you just signed your death warrant. Had one of those already. Didn't take the first time. This isn't a game. No, it's my land, my home, and you're trespassing. Rusk had his pistol half drawn, face twisted in confusion and anger. Everyone calm down. Shut up, Rusk, Stroud snapped. This stopped being your show the second that old bastard stepped out of the trees. My show? Rusk's voice went cold. You hired me. You brought me here under false pretenses. You don't get to tell me to shut up. I'll tell you whatever I want. You're paid muscle. Act like it. The words hung there, ugly and revealing. On the ridge, the other riders shifted. Dalton's hand was definitely on his gun now. The nervous one, Carver, looked ready to bolt. Paid muscle, Rusk repeated slowly. That's what you think I am. That's what you are. Then consider my contract terminated. Stroud's head whipped around. What? I don't work for liars, and I don't fight other men's vendettas for free. Rusk holstered his pistol deliberately. You want that old man in the trees? You go get him yourself. You walk away now. You don't get paid. I'll survive. Stroud's jaw worked. You're making a mistake. Probably, but it's my mistake to make. Rusk gathered his reins, looked at the men on the ridge. Anyone who wants to ride out with me, now's the time. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Carver urged his horse forward. Slow at first, then faster. He came down off the ridge at a trot, swung wide around Stroud and Rusk, didn't look at anyone. Coward, Stroud called after him. Carver didn't respond, just kept riding. 2 more men followed. Younger guns, hired hands who'd signed on for easy money and were realizing this wasn't that. They rode past without a word. That left 10. Stroud, Dalton, and 8 others whose names Walter didn't know and probably never would. Rusk watched the deserters go, then looked at Walter. Something passed across his face. Not quite respect, but close. You got stones, I'll give you that. Just tired of being pushed. Fair enough? Rusk turned his horse. Good luck, old man. You're going to need it. Then he was riding away too, back straight, refusing to hurry despite the guns at his back. Stroud let him go. His attention was fixed entirely on Ronan now, like Walter had ceased to exist. Well, Stroud said, looks like it's just us now. And 10 guns, Ronan said. Details. Important details. Stroud dismounted, slow, confident. He moved like a man who'd done this before and wasn't worried about the outcome. You could have stayed hidden, could have let the old man take his chances, but you didn't. You never could resist being the hero. I'm not a hero. No, you're predictable. Same thing, really. Ronan descended the last 2 steps, rifle held loose but ready. The distance between him and Stroud was maybe 15 yards, kill range for any competent shooter. 30 years, Ronan said. You waited 30 years to finish this. Didn't wait, moved on, built a life. But when I heard rumors you were alive, when I heard you were haunting some widow's land out in the middle of nowhere, Stroud smiled. Had to see for myself. Had to know if the ghost was real. How'd you find me? Wasn't hard. You're not as invisible as you think. People talk. Trappers, traders, drifters, they all mentioned the quiet farm with the old man who never had visitors but sometimes had fresh game on his porch. He couldn't have caught himself. Didn't take much to put it together. So you manufactured a land dispute. I created an opportunity. The land thing was legitimate. My employer really does want to expand. But I made sure this property was on the list. Made sure I was the one who came to handle negotiations. All this to draw me out. All this to finish what I started in Red Canyon. Dalton called down from the ridge. Stroud, we doing this or talking it to death? Patience, Stroud said without looking away from Ronan. Good things take time. Walter stepped off the porch. Both barrels of the shotgun were loaded again, and he held it like he meant business. You want him, Walter said. You go through me first. Stroud barely glanced at him. Stay out of this, old man. This is between Ronan and me. He's on my property. That makes it my business. You don't understand what you're... I understand fine. You're a murderer who shot a man in the back 30 years ago and wants to do it again. That's all I need to understand. Something flickered in Stroud's expression. Surprise, maybe. Or reassessment. The widow's husband, he said. I heard she married safe. Married boring. Guess she picked better than I thought. Don't talk about her, Ronan said, voice low, dangerous. Why not? She's why you're here, isn't she? Why you spent 3 decades playing guardian angel to a man you should have hated, all because you loved a woman who didn't love you back. She loved me. Not enough. Ronan's knuckles went white on the rifle. Say your name again. I dare you. Sarah, Stroud said, deliberately, precisely. Sarah Hayes, the woman who broke the great Ronan creed. The rifle came up fast. Not fast enough. Stroud's pistol cleared leather while Ronan was still raising the barrel. The shot rang out, and Ronan twisted sideways, dropping to one knee. Walter fired without thinking. The shotgun's blast took Stroud in the shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, pistol skittering across the dirt. The ridge erupted. 10 guns opened up at once. Bullets punched through the air, through the porch railings, through the door frame. Walter dove behind the water trough, shells pinging off stone and wood around him. Ronan rolled, came up with the rifle, and fired twice. 2 men on the ridge dropped. The others scattered for cover. "Inside!" Walter shouted. Ronan limped toward the porch, blood streaming from his side. Not a fatal hit, but bad enough. Walter laid down covering fire, both barrels, reloading as fast as his old hands allowed. They made it inside just as the front of the house disintegrated under concentrated gunfire. Windows shattered. The door splintered. The old wood walls that had weathered 30 years of frontier weather proved less resistant to bullets. Walter slammed the door shut, wedged a chair under the handle. Ronan collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, pressing his hand to the wound. "How bad?" Walter asked. "Bad enough? Can you shoot? Can I breathe?" "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Outside, Dalton was shouting orders. "Flank left, flank right. Burn them out if you have to." Walter helped Ronan to the window. They took positions on opposite sides. Ronan upstairs with the rifle, Walter down with the shotgun and the old Colt he'd pulled from the drawer. The next wave came fast. 3 men broke from cover, running for the barn. Ronan's rifle cracked twice. 1 went down, the other 2 made it to cover. Return fire punched through the upper windows, forcing Ronan back. 2 more came from the left, using the fence line for cover. Walter fired the shotgun through the broken window, missed, fired again. One of them stumbled. The other kept coming. "Reloading!" Ronan called from upstairs. Walter grabbed the Colt, aimed careful, squeezed the trigger. The advancing man dropped. The one who'd stumbled scrambled back behind the fence, leaving his partner's body in the dirt. "They're probing," Ronan called down. "Testing our coverage." "How many left?" 7, maybe 8. Plus Stroud if he's still breathing. "I hit him clean. Shoulder. He'll survive." More gunfire. Systematic now, concentrated on specific points. The front door took heavy damage. The side window blew out completely. They were wearing down the structure, preparing for the final push. Walter's hands shook as he reloaded. Not from fear this time, from exhaustion, from the impossibility of holding off 8 men with nothing but old weapons and older bodies. "We can't hold them forever," he said. "Don't need forever. Just need long enough." For what? For them to make a mistake. A bottle sailed through the broken window, trailing fire. Kerosene. Primitive, but effective. Walter dove for it, grabbed it barehanded despite the heat, and hurled it back through the window. It shattered outside, spreading flames across the dry ground. "That was stupid," Ronan called down. "Worked, didn't it?" "You're bleeding." Walter looked at his hands. Burns. Blisters already forming. He wrapped them in a kitchen towel and picked up the shotgun again. The fire outside spread slowly. Not enough fuel to really catch, but enough to create smoke and confusion. Dalton's men fell back, regrouping behind the barn and fence line. In the brief lull, Walter climbed the stairs. Ronan was propped against the wall, rifle across his lap, blood soaking through his shirt. His face was gray. "You need a doctor," Walter said. "I need about 10 things I'm not getting. A doctor's on the list." Walter tore strips from an old sheet, started binding the wound. His burned hands made it clumsy work, but Ronan didn't complain. "Why'd you do it?" Ronan asked. "Do what?" "Fire those warning shots. I was walking out. It would have been clean." "Clean for who? You'd be dead and they'd take the land anyway. That's not clean. That's just giving up." "Giving up keeps you alive." "For what? So I can watch them burn Sarah's garden, tear down the house we built, live out my days knowing I let a good man die because I was too scared to fight?" Walter pulled the bandage tight. No, that's not living, that's just breathing. Ronan looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What'd you expect? Safe, boring, the kind of man who couldn't protect her. I couldn't. Not from the fever, not from dying, but I could give her 30 years of peace. That counted for something. It counted for everything. The moment hung between them. Then gunfire erupted again, shattering it. This time they came from 3 sides at once. Coordinated assault. Dalton had learned from the probing attacks, figured out the angles. Ronan dragged himself to the window, started firing. Walter ran downstairs, covered the front and left side. They moved like they'd been doing this for years instead of days, calling out positions, coordinating fire. But there were too many angles, too many guns. A man made it to the porch. Walter shot him through the door. Another came through the side window. Ronan's rifle dropped him halfway through. But for every one they stopped, another got closer. The barn was on fire now. Someone had torched it. The flames lit up the afternoon, turned everything orange and hellish. Smoke poured across the property, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. Walter's ammunition was running low. The shotgun shells were almost gone. The Colt had maybe 6 rounds left. Ronan, he called up, how many you got? 4 rounds, maybe 5. That's it? That's it. They were losing. Slowly, inevitably, they were losing. A crash from the back of the house. Someone had broken through the kitchen window. Walter spun, fired the Colt twice, hit nothing but wall. The figure ducked back. More crashes. They were coming from everywhere now, overwhelming the defense through sheer numbers. Ronan appeared at the top of the stairs, rifle in one hand, the other pressed to his bleeding side. We need to fall back. To where? Root cellar. It's defensible. It's a coffin. It's better than dying on the stairs. Walter wanted to argue, wanted to say they could hold, they could fight, they could win, but he'd stopped lying to himself decades ago. They retreated down to the cellar, Walter going first, Ronan covering. The old wooden door was thick, reinforced. It might hold for a while. They wedged it shut, descended into darkness, broken only by the light from a small vent. The cellar smelled like earth and time. Sarah's preserves still lined the shelves, dusty jars that Walter couldn't bring himself to throw away. He grabbed one, held it up to the light. Peaches. She'd made them the summer before she died. I'm sorry, Ronan said. For what now? For all of it. For loving her. For staying. For bringing this down on you. You didn't bring anything? Stroud did. Because of me. Because of him. Big difference. Above them, boots thundered, searching, ransacking, looking for them. They'll find us, Walter said. Probably. Then what? Then we make them pay for it. Ronan checked his rifle. 4 rounds, like he'd said. Walter had the Colt with 6 bullets and the shotgun with 2 shells left. 12 shots between 2 dying men. The math didn't work. But they readied the weapons anyway, because what else was there to do? The cellar door shook. Someone testing it. Locked, a voice called out. They're down there. Burn it, Dalton's voice. Burn the whole house. What about Stroud? He's fine. Shoulder wound, he'll live. Now burn it. Footsteps retreating, smoke starting to seep through the floorboards above. Walter looked at Ronan. Ronan looked back. Hell of a way to go, Walter said. I've imagined worse. Really? No, this is pretty bad. Despite everything, Walter laughed. It came out ragged, maybe a little hysterical, but real. The smoke thickened. The heat built. Above them, the house was dying, 30 years of memories turning to ash and ember. Walter thought about Sarah, about the day they'd moved in, young and hopeful, and convinced they could make something grow in this stubborn land, about the night sitting on that porch, watching sunsets, planning futures that never quite materialized the way they'd imagined, about the moment she'd said yes, choosing him, choosing this life. He'd never regretted it, never once. Ronan, he said through the smoke. Yeah? She did love you. I want you to know that. Not the same way she loved me, but it was real. I know. You should have come to the door. I know that too. The ceiling above them groaned. Structural damage. The house was coming apart. Walter closed his eyes, thought about peaches, about bread, about a woman's laugh that sounded like bells. Then the shooting started again. But this time it wasn't aimed at them. It was coming from outside. Different guns. Different positions. Walter's eyes snapped open. What the hell? Ronan was already moving, pressing his ear to the cellar door. Can't tell. Multiple shooters. Not ours. Who then? The answer came in Rusk's voice, cutting through the chaos outside. Drop your weapons. You're surrounded. Dalton's response was a string of profanity and gunfire. But there were too many voices now. Too many guns. A whole orchestra of violence that Walter and Ronan weren't playing in. Rusk came back, Walter said, disbelieving. With help, sounds like. The fight outside intensified, men shouting, horses screaming, the distinctive crack of repeating rifles laying down heavy fire. Then, gradually, it faded. Silence settled, broken only by the crackling of flames and the occasional groan of dying timber. Footsteps approached the cellar door. Walter raised the Colt. Ronan brought the rifle up despite the blood and the pain. Hayes! Rusk's voice. You alive down there? Walter and Ronan exchanged glances. Maybe, Walter called back. That's the worst answer I've ever heard. You alive or not? Depends on who's asking. It's Rusk. I brought the sheriff and 12 deputies. The ones who didn't die are in custody. Stroud? Alive, wounded, extremely angry. Walter lowered the Colt slowly. Why'd you come back? A pause, then, told you. I don't work for liars. And I sure as hell don't participate in murder under false pretenses. When I realized what this really was, a revenge killing dressed up as a land dispute, I rode straight to the territorial marshal. Took some convincing, but your friend's warning shots helped. Hard to claim self-defense when you're the one who brought 13 guns. The cellar door rattled. You going to open this, or do I need to break it down? Ronan looked at Walter. Walter shrugged. They removed the wedge. Rusk pulled the door open, stepped back from the smoke billowing out. His face was soot-stained, and there was blood on his jacket that probably wasn't his. You two look like hell, he said. Feel worse, Ronan replied, limping up the stairs. They emerged into what was left of the house. The front room was gone, consumed by fire. The kitchen was barely standing, but the structure itself, stubborn as the land it sat on, refused to fall completely. Outside, deputies were securing prisoners. Walter counted 5 men on the ground, hands bound, 2 bodies covered with blankets. The rest must have run when the law showed up. Stroud was on his knees, holding his shattered shoulder, glaring murder at everyone. A deputy stood over him with a rifle. When Stroud saw Ronan, his expression went beyond hate into something almost transcendent. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Ronan replied, simply, factually. I'll get out. I'll find you again. You'll hang, attempted murder, arson, a dozen other charges. You're done. We'll see. The territorial marshal, a weathered man in his 50s with a badge that had seen hard years, walked over. Mr. Creed, I presume? Ronan nodded. I'm going to need a statement. Several, actually. This is going to be a long night. I'm bleeding. Then we'll get you to a doctor first, but then we talk. The marshal looked at Walter. You the property owner? What's left of it? Sorry about your house. Not your fault. Still sorry. They loaded Ronan into a wagon, along with 2 wounded deputies. Walter climbed in beside him, refusing to be separated. As they rode away from the smoldering ruins, Walter looked back one more time. The barn was gone. The house was gutted. The fields would need another year just to recover from the damage. But the land itself remained, stubborn, unyielding, eternal. We'll rebuild, Walter said. Ronan, fading from blood loss and exhaustion, managed a weak smile. We? Unless you've got somewhere better to be. Haven't had anywhere to be for 30 years. Then I guess you're staying. Guess I am. The wagon rolled on through the afternoon, carrying 2 old men who'd survived the impossible through sheer bloody-minded refusal to die on someone else's terms. Behind them, smoke rose into a sky that was finally, mercifully, quiet. The doctor's office smelled like carbolic acid and old blood. Walter sat in the waiting area on a chair that creaked under his weight, burned hands wrapped in temporary bandages that the marshal had applied in the wagon. Through the thin wall, he could hear voices, The doctor's calm and professional, Ronan's rough with pain. A deputy stood by the door. Young kid, maybe 22, with nervous eyes that kept darting to Walter like he expected trouble. "You can relax," Walter said. "I'm not going anywhere." Marshall said to keep watch. Over a 63-year-old man with burned hands? Orders are orders. Walter didn't argue. The kid was just doing his job. Instead, he leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind an exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had doubled. Every part of him hurt. His hands, his back, his knees. His chest ached from breathing smoke. His ears rang from gunfire. But he was alive. They were both alive. That seemed impossible. Seemed like the kind of thing that shouldn't have happened, given the odds. But impossible things had a way of occurring when people were too stubborn to accept the alternative. The door to the examination room opened. The doctor emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. He was older than Walter, which was saying something, with wire-framed spectacles and the tired look of a man who'd seen every variation of frontier violence. "He'll live," the doctor said. "Bullet went through clean, missed anything vital. He's lucky." "Doesn't feel lucky." "Never does. But he is." The doctor looked at Walter's hands. "Your turn." Walter followed him into the examination room. Ronan was on the table, shirtless, a fresh bandage wrapped around his torso. His skin was pale, mapped with scars that told stories Walter would probably never hear. "Don't look at me like that," Ronan said. "Like what?" "Like you're cataloging damage." "Hard not to. You look like a relief map of bad decisions." "That's accurate." The doctor gestured for Walter to sit. He unwrapped the temporary bandages carefully, examined the burns with practiced efficiency. "Second degree," he said. "Could be worse. Could be better." "You grabbed something hot?" "Burning bottle." "Of course you did." The doctor started applying salve. It stung worse than the original burn. "You're going to need to keep these clean. Change the dressing twice a day. No heavy work for at least 2 weeks. I've got a farm to rebuild. You've got hands to save. Farm can wait." Walter gritted his teeth as the doctor wrapped fresh bandages. White cotton, tight enough to protect but not so tight it cut off circulation. When he finished, the doctor stepped back. "The marshal wants to talk to both of you. Feel up to it?" "Do we have a choice?" Ronan asked. "Not really." "Then I guess we're up to it." The marshal came in 5 minutes later, carrying a notebook and the weary expression of someone who'd been doing this job too long. He pulled up a chair, sat down with a grunt. "Let's start with the basics," he said. "Mr. Creed, I need to know everything about your history with Caleb Stroud." Ronan told the story, all of it. The mercenary work, the job in Wyoming, the betrayal in Red Canyon. He didn't embellish, didn't justify, just laid out the facts like evidence at a trial. The marshal took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When Ronan finished, the marshal sat back. "That's attempted murder, plain and simple. Combined with today's actions, arson, assault, conspiracy, Stroud's looking at a long drop and a short rope." "He'll try to make a deal," Ronan said. "Probably. But I don't make deals with men who burn down homes and try to murder witnesses. The territorial judge feels the same way." "What about the others?" Walter asked. "Dalton and the rest. Depends on how cooperative they are. The ones who ran might get lighter sentences if they turn themselves in. The ones we caught? They're accessories to everything Stroud did. That's serious time, even if they don't hang." "And Rusk?" The marshal's expression softened slightly. "Rusk's in the clear. He came to me before anyone died. Told me what he suspected. Without his testimony, we wouldn't have had grounds to intervene." "Why'd he do it?" Walter asked. "He could have just walked away. I asked him that. He said he has rules, lines he won't cross. Apparently participating in a murder disguised as a land dispute crosses those lines. Honorable for a hired gun. There are degrees of everything, Mr. Hayes, even among dangerous men." The marshal flipped through his notes. "I'll need written statements from both of you, and you'll have to testify when this goes to trial." "When will that be?" 3 months, maybe 4. Judge has a circuit to complete first. "We'll be there," Ronan said. "See that you are. Your testimony is crucial." The marshal stood, tucked his notebook away. "One more thing. Stroud's employer, the man who wanted the land, he's going to claim ignorance. Say he had no knowledge of Stroud's personal vendetta. Will that work? Might. Rich men have a way of insulating themselves from consequences, but I'll do what I can to make sure he faces charges as an accessory. After the marshal left, Walter and Ronan sat in silence. The doctor had gone to tend to other patients, the wounded deputies, a farmer who'd broken his arm, the usual parade of frontier injuries. What now? Walter asked finally. Now we figure out what's left. Of the farm? Of everything. They borrowed a wagon from the marshal and rode back as evening settled in. The return journey felt longer than the escape, every bump in the road a reminder of injuries that would take weeks to heal. When they crested this final ridge, Walter's breath caught. The damage looked worse in the fading light. The barn was a skeleton of charred timber, the house sagged like a broken promise. The fields were trampled, the fence line destroyed in places where horses and men had fought and died. But the land itself remained. The ridge, the trees, the stubborn earth that had weathered worse than this over millennia. Walter climbed down from the wagon, walked slowly to what was left of the porch. The steps were intact. The railing was gone. The door hung at an angle, splintered and scorched. Inside, the destruction was total. Furniture overturned and burned, windows blown out. The kitchen table where Sarah had served countless meals was now kindling and ash. But the preserves in the cellar had survived. The root vegetables stored underground were untouched. The well still had clean water. Starting points. Ronan appeared beside him, moving slow, favoring his wounded side. It's not as bad as it could be, Ronan said. It's pretty bad. I've seen worse. Where? Everywhere I've ever been. Walter picked through the debris, looking for salvage. He found the coffee pot, dented but usable. A single plate, miraculously unbroken. The photograph of Sarah that had hung on the wall, smoke-damaged but recognizable. He held the photograph carefully, looking at her young face frozen in sepia tones. She'd hated having her picture taken, said it stole a piece of your soul. But he'd convinced her just once for their anniversary. She was beautiful, Ronan said quietly. Yes. I'm sorry for all of this. Stop apologizing. Wasn't your fault. Felt like it was. Feelings aren't facts. Walter set the photograph aside, kept digging. Found the old Bible that Sarah had read from, pages warped from heat but mostly intact. A handful of eating utensils. A lamp with a cracked chimney. Small things. Survival things. As darkness fell, they built a fire in the yard from scrap wood. Sat beside it like drifters, two old men with nowhere else to go and no particular reason to leave. We can rebuild, Ronan said. The barn first, then the house. Won't be fancy, but it'll stand. You know how to build a barn? I know how to follow instructions and lift heavy things. That's most of construction right there. Walter almost smiled. We'll need lumber, tools, money we don't have. The marshal mentioned territorial assistance. They have funds for victims of criminal activity. How much? Enough to start. Not enough to finish, but enough to start. They sat in silence, watching the fire. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Another answered. The land going about its business, indifferent to human drama. Can I ask you something? Walter said. Depends what it is. All those years in the trees, what'd you do? I mean, besides watching. Ronan considered the question. Hunted, trapped, sold pelts in town once a month, read books when I could get them, carved things out of wood. Tried not to think too much. Did it work? No. Thinking's what I did most. What'd you think about? Her, mostly her, what I could have done different, what I should have said. All the usual regrets people carry around when they lose something they can't get back. Walter fed another stick into the fire. She knew, near the end, she'd look out at those trees and smile. Just a little, like she'd figured something out. What'd she figure out? That you were there, that you'd stayed. I think it gave her comfort, knowing she was... He paused, searching for the right word. Remembered, even after she was gone. Ronan's jaw worked. He didn't trust himself to speak. You did right by her, Walter continued. Maybe not the way you wanted, but you did right. Doesn't feel like right. Right rarely does. They lapsed back into silence. The fire crackled. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. I've been thinking, Ronan said eventually, about what the doctor said. 2 weeks of no heavy work. What about it? You can't rebuild alone. Not with burned hands. Not at your age. And you can't rebuild with a hole in your side. So we wait. We heal. Then we work together. That could take months. Got somewhere else to be? Walter looked at him. At this man who'd loved the same woman, who'd made different choices, who'd somehow ended up here beside him despite 3 decades of separation. No, Walter said, I don't. Then it's settled. Over the next week, they established a routine. Mornings were for recovery, changing bandages, assessing damage, forcing themselves to eat despite appetites killed by injury and exhaustion. Afternoons were for planning. What to rebuild first, where to source materials, how to make meager funds stretch across impossible needs. Ronan sketched plans in the dirt with a stick, drawing from memories of structures he'd helped construct decades ago. Walter corrected measurements, pointed out where the old house had been strongest, where it had failed. The foundation's still good, Ronan said on the 3rd day. We build on that, we save time and money. The roof's gone. So we start there. Get protection from weather, then work down. Backwards construction. Practical construction. They argued about materials, about methods, about everything. But the arguments felt different than they should have. Not hostile. Almost comfortable. Like 2 men who'd been doing this for years instead of days. On the 5th day, a wagon arrived. Walter looked up from where he and Ronan were sorting through salvageable wood to see a familiar figure driving a team of horses. Rusk. He pulled up 20 yards out, hands visible, making it clear he wasn't armed. Can I approach? He called. Walter and Ronan exchanged glances. Ronan shrugged. Come ahead, Walter called back. Rusk climbed down from the wagon carefully. He looked different out of the saddle, smaller somehow, more human. He walked over with the cautious gait of someone who knew he might not be welcome. Didn't expect to see you again, Walter said. Didn't expect to come back, but I owed you something. You don't owe us anything. You stopped a murder. I participated in the setup. Even if I didn't know the full picture, I should have seen the sign sooner. Rusk gestured to the wagon. Brought lumber, tools, some supplies. It's not much, but it's a start. Walter stared at him. Why? Because a man's home matters. Because you stood your ground when you didn't have to. Because, he paused, because I've spent 20 years taking things from people. Seemed like time to try giving something back. Ronan walked to the wagon, looked at the supplies. Quality lumber, new tools still in their wrapping, bags of nails and fixtures. This is more than a start, he said. This is serious money. Consider it an investment in redemption, or guilt. Haven't decided which. We can't pay you back, Walter said. I'm not asking you to. They unloaded the wagon together, Rusk doing the heavy lifting while Walter and Ronan directed placement. When they finished, Rusk wiped his brow. The trial's in 3 months, he said. I'll be testifying, figured you should know. Against Stroud? Against the whole operation. Stroud, his employer, everyone involved. The prosecutor thinks we have a strong case. Good. Rusk looked at the damaged farm, at the 2 old men trying to rebuild from ashes. You really think you can put this back together? We'll manage, Walter said. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. Rusk almost smiled. I believe you might actually pull it off. He left as the sun reached its zenith, riding away with an empty wagon and something that might have been peace on his weathered face. Decent of him, Ronan said, watching the wagon disappear. Unexpected. Those 2. They started work the next morning, despite the doctor's orders. Slow work, careful work. Ronan couldn't lift heavy things, so he measured and cut. Walter couldn't grip properly, so he planned and directed. Together, they managed. The first week, they cleared debris, sorted salvage from trash, organized materials, prepared the foundation for new construction. The second week, they started framing. The barn first, simpler structure, more immediate need. Ronan's measurements were precise. Walter's eye for level was still sharp. The frame went up crooked at first, had to be adjusted twice, but eventually it stood. Not perfect, but standing. Other help arrived unexpectedly. The farmer whose land bordered Walter's to the west showed up with his 2 sons, offering labor. A merchant from town delivered supplies on credit, saying the marshal had vouched for Walter's character. Even the nervous deputy, Carver, who'd ridden away during the confrontation, appeared one morning with guilt in his eyes and a willingness to work. He didn't say much, just picked up tools and followed directions until sundown. Slowly, impossibly, the farm began to take shape again. The barn's roof went on in early September. Not fancy, plain timber and tar paper, but it shed rain and provided shelter for the 2 horses that Walter had managed to buy with territorial assistance funds. The house took longer, the frame was more complex, the requirements more specific. They worked through September into October, racing against the coming winter. Some days were harder than others. Days when Ronan's wound ached and he could barely move. Days when Walter's hands hurt so much he had to stop work entirely. Days when they both sat on the incomplete porch and stared at the enormity of what they'd lost, wondering if they were fools for trying to reclaim it. But they kept working. By late October, the house had walls. By November, it had a roof. It was smaller than the original, single story instead of 2, fewer rooms, simpler layout. But it was solid. The windows fit properly. The door hung straight. The stove they'd salvaged from the wreckage worked well enough to heat the main room. The first night they slept inside instead of camping in the yard, Walter lay on his bedroll listening to the wind test the new walls. "It's quiet," he said. From across the room, Ronan replied. "Different quiet than the trees." "Better?" "Different." Walter thought about that. About 30 years of sleeping alone under stars, watching a house from a distance. About choosing that isolation deliberately, punishing yourself for loving someone who chose differently. "You don't have to stay," Walter said. "In the house, I mean. If it's too much, too many memories or whatever, you can—" "I'm staying." "You sure?" "I'm sure." They fell silent. Outside, an owl hunted. Inside, 2 old men finally stopped running from ghosts. The trial came in late November, 3 months almost to the day after the attack. Walter and Ronan rode to the territorial courthouse in the back of the marshal's wagon, dressed in the only clean clothes they owned. The burns on Walter's hands had healed to pink scars. The wound in Ronan's side had closed, leaving another mark to add to his collection. The courthouse was packed. Apparently attempted murder and arson made for popular entertainment on the frontier. Stroud sat at the defendant's table, shoulder still in a sling, face carved from stone. When Ronan entered, their eyes met. No words exchanged, none needed. 30 years of hate compressed into a single look. The trial lasted 3 days. Testimony from Rusk, from the deputies who'd responded, from the doctor who'd treated the wounded. The prosecutor built a case brick by brick, showing premeditation, showing conspiracy, showing clear intent to murder. On the second day, Walter testified, told the jury about the initial threats, about Stroud's confession, about the attack itself. He kept his voice steady, his facts clear. The defense attorney tried to shake him, suggested he'd provoke the confrontation, but Walter didn't budge. "They came onto my land with guns," he said. "I defended my home." "That's not provocation, that's property rights." The jury nodded. Frontier people understood property rights. Ronan testified on the 3rd day. He told the story of Red Canyon, of the betrayal, of the 30 years that followed. The defense attorney tried to paint him as a criminal seeking revenge, but the prosecutor countered with evidence of Stroud's pattern of violence, his history of betrayal, his deliberate manipulation of the land dispute to draw Ronan out. "He didn't come for the land," the prosecutor said in his closing argument. "He came to finish a murder he'd started 30 years ago, and he was willing to burn down an innocent man's home to do it." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. "On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of arson, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty." Stroud's face didn't change. He'd known this was coming. The judge sentenced him to hang. Execution scheduled for January. Dalton and 3 others received 20 years hard labor. The rest took plea deals, testified against Stroud, received lighter sentences. Stroud's employer, a cattle baron named Morrison, was acquitted due to lack of evidence directly connecting him to the murder plot. But the scandal ruined him financially. Within 6 months, he'd lost everything to lawsuits and withdrawal of business partnerships. As they left the courthouse, Stroud called out from where deputies were shackling him. "Ronan!" Ronan stopped, didn't turn around. You win, Stroud said. Congratulations. Nobody won. I'm gonna hang. You get to rebuild. That's a win. That's survival. Different thing. Is it? Ronan finally turned to look at him. I spent 30 years in those woods because of what you did. 30 years alone. You didn't just try to kill my body. You killed everything else. So no, this isn't a win. This is just over. He walked away without waiting for a response. Outside, the November wind cut through their coats. Walter and Ronan stood on the courthouse steps, watching the town move around them, people going about their business, unconcerned with the drama that had just concluded inside. How do you feel? Walter asked. Empty? That's honest. It's all I've got. They rode back to the farm in silence. The marshal dropped them at the property line, tipped his hat, and left them to walk the last quarter mile. The house stood solid against the early winter sky. Smoke rose from the chimney. They'd left a fire banked that morning. The barn's new roof gleamed with recent snow. It wasn't Sarah's farm. That was gone, burned away with the old house and 30 years of accumulated memories. This was something new. Built on old foundations, yes, but new nonetheless. They went inside, stamped snow from their boots, hung their coats on pegs that Ronan had carved. Walter started coffee while Ronan added wood to the fire. The ritual was comfortable now, practiced. Two men moving around a shared space with the ease of long familiarity. We should go visit her, Walter said. Sarah, tell her it's over. Ronan looked up from the fire. Think she'd want to hear from me? Think she'd have been furious if you hadn't come to the door eventually. The grave was on the hill behind the house, marked with the stone Walter had carved. The letters had weathered over the years, but were still readable. Sarah Hayes, beloved wife, 1829 to 1893. They stood in the snow, hats in hands, two old men paying respects to a woman who'd shaped both their lives in different ways. I'm sorry I took so long, Ronan said quietly. To come down from the trees to help him rebuild, to stop hiding. The wind was the only answer. Walter set his hand on the stone, cold granite under scarred fingers. We made it through. That's what matters. We made it through, and now we're building something. Not what we had before, but something. They stood there a while longer, then walked back down to the house as snow began to fall in earnest. Winter coming on hard, the way it always did on the frontier. But the house was warm. The barn was sound. The well had good water. They had food stored, wood split, animals sheltered. They had enough. That night, Walter cooked dinner, beans and bacon, nothing fancy. They ate at the table Ronan had built, simpler than the one Sarah had set, but solid. I was thinking, Ronan said between bites, about spring. What about it? We should plant, not just for survival. Actually try to make the land produce. It's stubborn land. So are we. Walter considered it. The fields had lain mostly fallow for years, yielding just enough to keep him alive but never thriving. Maybe with 2 sets of hands, with actual planning and effort, they could coax something better from the soil. What would we plant? He asked. Wheat, maybe, barley, whatever grows in this climate. We asked the farmers around here, learn from their mistakes. That's long-term thinking. I'm trying something new. How's it feel? Strange, but not bad. They finished dinner, cleaned the dishes, sat by the fire as darkness pressed against the windows. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled and the house held firm. Thank you, Ronan said. Walter looked up. For what? For not letting me walk out to Stroud that day, for firing those warning shots, for being stubborn enough to fight when surrender would have been easier. Thank you for the same. I didn't do anything. You stayed. For 30 years you stayed. That's something. Ronan stared into the fire. I loved her. I want you to know that. It wasn't obsession or guilt or anything complicated. I just loved her. I know. And I'm glad she chose you. You gave her a good life, a safe life. That's what she needed. She needed both of us, probably, just in different ways. That's generous. That's true. The fire burned down to coals. Walter banked it for the night, while Ronan checked the door, made sure everything was secured against the cold. They settled into their bedrolls. Ronan still refused to take the actual bed, said he'd spent too long on the ground to get used to mattresses now. Ronan, Walter said into the darkness, Yeah? I'm glad you finally came to the door. A long pause. Then quietly, me too. Sleep came easier than it had in months. No watching, no waiting, no wondering when violence would arrive. Just two old men in a house they'd built together, weathering winter like the land itself weathered, stubborn, unyielding, impossible to break. December brought heavy snows. They spent the days maintaining the property, feeding animals, keeping paths clear. Simple work. Honest work. Evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, often not. Just existing in companionable silence. Walter taught Ronan to cook more than beans and bacon. Ronan taught Walter wilderness skills, how to read weather, how to track game, how to survive alone if you had to. Not planning on being alone anymore? Walter said during one such lesson. Good habits anyway. Christmas came and went unmarked except for Ronan producing a bottle of whiskey he'd bought in town. Where'd you get money for this? Walter asked. Sold some pelts. Been saving for something special. This qualify? Can't think of anything more special than not dying. They drank to that. To survival. To Sarah's memory. To the impossible friendship that had emerged from ashes and violence. January arrived with news that Stroud had been hanged at dawn on the 6th. The marshal rode out personally to tell them. He didn't have any last words, the marshal said. Just went quiet. Thought you'd want to know. Ronan nodded. Thank you for coming all this way. Least I could do. You planning on staying out here? Or moving on now that it's finished? Staying. Both of you? Walter spoke up. Both of us. The marshal looked between them, seemed satisfied with what he saw. Good. Land needs people who'll fight for it. You've proven you will. After he left, Ronan walked up to Sarah's grave alone. He stood there for an hour in the cold, saying goodbye to ghosts. When he came back, his eyes were red, but his shoulders sat different, lighter somehow. Ready? Walter asked. For what? For whatever comes next. Ronan thought about it. About 30 years of watching from the trees, about a woman he'd loved and lost, about a man he'd hated and finally seen justice catch, about a farm rising from ruins and a friendship forged in fire. Yeah, he said, I'm ready. Spring came late that year, but it came. The snow melted, the ground thawed, and two old men walked the fields together, planning where to plant, how to irrigate, what to try that might actually work. The land was still stubborn, still difficult, still demanded more than it gave, but they'd learned something about stubbornness themselves. And this time, they weren't facing it alone. The first wheat shoots broke ground in late April, tiny green fingers reaching toward a sun that was finally showing mercy. Walter knelt in the dirt, bad knees protesting, examining the growth with the cautious optimism of a man who'd been disappointed by this land before. They're coming up uneven, he said. Ronan crouched beside him, grunting with the effort. Better uneven than not at all. Sarah used to say the same thing about my fence work. She was right then, too. They'd planted 10 acres. Not much by the standards of real farms, but for two old men working alone, it was ambitious. The neighboring farmer, Henderson, who'd helped with the barn, had advised them on soil preparation, seed depth, irrigation timing. His sons had plowed the fields in exchange for a share of whatever harvest came, if any harvest came. The land was still stubborn, still resistant to human intention, but there were shoots. That counted for something. Walter stood, brushing dirt from his knees. His hands had healed well enough, though the scars remained. He'd learned to work around the stiffness, adjusting his grip, finding new ways to hold tools. Adaptation. That's what survival looked like on the frontier. Not triumph, just constant, grinding adaptation. We need to check the irrigation ditches, Ronan said, shading his eyes against the morning sun. Henderson said if we let them silt up, we'll lose everything in the first dry spell. When did you become an expert on farming? Same time you became an expert on not dying. We learn what we need. They walked the property together, something they did most mornings now, checking fences, inspecting structures, looking for problems before problems became disasters. The ritual gave their days structure, purpose beyond mere survival. The house stood solid on its foundation, weathering its first spring. Small, simple, but theirs. The barn sheltered 3 horses now, the 2 Walter had bought and one Ronan had traded for using skills Walter didn't ask about. Some things from the old life were better left unexamined. They found a break in the irrigation ditch near the northern fence line, water bleeding out into useless ground instead of feeding the crops. Ronan grabbed a shovel while Walter fetched clay from the pile they kept for repairs. Working together, they sealed the breach. Not pretty work, but functional. That seemed to be their specialty. Functional over beautiful, lasting over impressive. You ever think about leaving? Walter asked as they worked. Going somewhere easier? Every day. What stops you? Ronan patted the clay firm, tested the seal. Nowhere else to go, and I'm tired of running. That's not much of a reason to stay. It's the only one I've got. Walter accepted that. They finished the repair, cleaned their tools, walked back toward the house as the sun climbed toward noon. A rider was waiting. Walter's hand went instinctively toward the rifle they kept by the door now. Old habits, probably permanent ones. But the rider raised both hands, showing he was unarmed. As they got closer, Walter recognized him. Carver, the young deputy who'd deserted during the fight, then returned to help rebuild. Mr. Hayes, Carver called out. Mr. Creed, hope I'm not intruding. Depends on why you're here, Ronan said. Carver dismounted, nervous energy in every movement. I wanted to thank you, properly, for not testifying against me. You ran, Walter said. Didn't shoot. Nothing to testify about. I was part of it. The initial threat. I rode with them. And then you left. And then you came back to help rebuild. That matters more than where you started. Carver looked at the ground, jaw working. I've been thinking about that day a lot. About how close I came to being on the wrong side of something that couldn't be undone. Most of us come close at some point, Ronan said. Question is what you do after. What did you do? After Red Canyon? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. I hid. For 30 years. Wouldn't recommend it. But you came out eventually. Didn't have a choice. Sometimes life makes you choose. Keep hiding or start living. I got lucky. Had someone willing to let me try living again. Walter felt something warm settle in his chest at those words. Not pride exactly. More like recognition. They'd both been hiding in different ways. Ronan in the trees, Walter in routine and resignation. It had taken violence to shake them loose, but here they were, living instead of just surviving. Carver shifted his weight. I'm leaving the territory, going west. Figured I should say goodbye first. What's west? Walter asked. Don't know yet. That's kind of the point. Clean slate, no history. History follows you, Ronan said. Trust me on that. Maybe. But I'd rather face it on my own terms than stay here where everyone knows what I almost became. Walter understood that impulse, the desire to outrun your mistakes. But he'd learned something these past months, watching wheat struggle up through stubborn soil, rebuilding from ashes with burned hands. You didn't outrun mistakes, you built on top of them. Take care of yourself, Walter said, extending his hand. Carver shook it, grip firm. Then he shook Ronan's hand too. Thank you. Both of you, for showing me there's more than one way to be brave. He rode away without looking back, heading toward whatever fresh start he imagined was waiting in the west. Think you'll find it? Ronan asked. Probably not, but maybe he'll find something else worth having. They watched until Carver disappeared over the ridge, then went inside to escape the midday heat. The house was cool, thick walls doing their job. Walter started coffee while Ronan pulled out the maps they'd been studying, property surveys, water rights documentation, soil composition charts that Henderson had loaned them. If we can get this crop in successfully, Ronan said, spreading the largest map across the table, we should think about expanding. Another 5 acres maybe. Plant rotation to keep the soil healthy. That's long-term thinking. I'm getting practice. Walter poured coffee, set a cup in front of Ronan. You planning on being here that long? Years from now? Where else would I be? I don't know, just making sure you're not still punishing yourself. Staying because you think you owe something. Ronan looked up from the map. Is that what you think I'm doing? I don't know what you're doing. That's why I'm asking. The coffee steamed between them. Outside, wind moved through the new wheat, a sound like whispered secrets. I'm staying because I want to, Ronan said finally. Because for the first time in 30 years, I'm part of something instead of apart from it. Because this, He gestured around the simple house, at the maps, at the life they were building. This matters. Not because it's penance, because it's real. Walter nodded slowly. Good. Just wanted to hear you say it. Why? Because I'm getting old, Ronan. Older than I've got a right to be, probably. And when I'm gone, I need to know this place won't die with me. That someone will keep it going. You're not dying anytime soon. Neither of us knows that. Age doesn't ask permission. Ronan's expression went serious. If you're asking what I think you're asking, I'm asking if you'll stay. After. When it's just you and this stubborn land and whatever we've managed to build. I'm asking if you'll keep it alive. Walter, I don't have children. Sarah couldn't. It broke her heart for a while, but she made peace with it. Said we'd build something else to leave behind. The farm was supposed to be that, but it needs someone to tend it. Someone who understands what it cost. Ronan stared at him. You're giving me the farm. I'm giving you a purpose, if you want it. That's not a small thing. No, it's not. They sat with that weight between them. The maps suddenly represented more than crop planting. They were legacy, future, the kind of permanence that both of them had thought was lost to them. Yes, Ronan said quietly. When the time comes, and it better not come for a long damn time, yes, I'll keep it going. Walter felt something release in his chest. Relief, maybe? Or just the knowledge that the work would continue, that the land wouldn't revert to wilderness the moment he stopped breathing. Good, he said. Now show me this expansion plan before the coffee gets cold. They spent the afternoon on logistics. By evening, they'd sketched out a 5-year plan that was probably optimistic but felt possible. Crop rotation, soil enrichment, maybe even a small orchard if they could find trees that tolerated the climate. Dreams, small ones, rooted in dirt and sweat instead of glory. That night, Walter couldn't sleep. He lay on his bedroll, listening to Ronan's breathing from across the room, thinking about time and memory and the strange paths that led people to each other. You awake? He asked the darkness. Yeah. Can I ask you something? Hasn't stopped you yet. Walter smiled despite himself. Did you love her more than I did? Silence. Long enough that Walter thought maybe he'd crossed a line. Then, no, just different. You loved her like she needed to be loved. Steady, safe, present. I loved her like a storm loves the sky. Powerful but destructive. She was right to choose you. But you never stopped. No, but I learned to love from a distance, to let that love be about her happiness instead of mine. That's the closest I ever got to being a good man. You're a good man now. I'm a work in progress. We both are. Walter thought about that. About redemption being a process instead of a destination. About how the hardest battles weren't fought with guns, but with yourself every morning, choosing to keep trying. Thank you, Walter said, for all of it. For staying, for fighting, for being here. Thank you for letting me in. Took you long enough. Took both of us. They fell silent again. Outside, the night was alive with spring sounds. Inside, 2 old men lay awake, thinking about the past and the future, and the narrow present where they actually lived. Summer came hard and dry. The wheat struggled, leaves yellowing at the edges despite their best irrigation efforts. Henderson warned them about grasshoppers, about rust, about a dozen other threats that could destroy a crop between sunrise and sunset. But the wheat held. Bent but didn't break, just like everything else on this land. In July, Ronan rode to town for supplies and came back with a letter. He handed it to Walter without comment. Walter recognized the handwriting on the envelope. His brother's wife, Clara. They'd written occasionally over the years, sparse communication between distant relatives who shared blood but little else. He opened it carefully, read slowly. Clara wrote that his brother had died. Heart failure, quick and relatively painless. The funeral had been 2 weeks ago. She'd sent the letter late because she hadn't known how to reach him, had finally asked the territorial marshal for his address. Walter read it twice, then set it down. Bad news? Ronan asked. My brother died. I'm sorry. Don't be. We weren't close. Haven't seen him in 15 years. He thought I was wasting my life out here. Were you? Walter looked around the simple house, thought about the wheat outside, about the friendship that had emerged from ashes. No, but he never would have understood that. Some people can't see value in quiet things. No, they need noise and achievement, proof of success. What's success look like to you? Walter considered the question. This, right here, still being alive, still trying, that's success enough. They burned the letter in the stove that evening, watching it curl and blacken. Not from disrespect, but from understanding that some connections were too thin to maintain, and holding on to them was just another form of punishment. August brought the first real test of the crop. A dry spell, 3 weeks without rain. The irrigation ditches ran low. Henderson's well went dry completely, forcing him to haul water from the creek. Walter and Ronan worked from dawn to dusk, redirecting what water they had, prioritizing the healthiest sections of wheat, making impossible choices about what to save and what to let go. "This is insane," Walter said one afternoon, hauling another bucket from the well. "We're going to kill ourselves trying to save a crop that might not even yield enough to break even." "Probably," Ronan agreed, hauling his own bucket. "But we're doing it anyway." "Why?" "Because giving up feels worse than dying tired." Walter laughed, harsh and breathless. "That's the worst motivational speech I've ever heard." "It's the truth." They kept hauling water, kept fighting, kept refusing to accept defeat. The rain finally came in late August, a 3-day storm that turned the dust to mud and filled the irrigation ditches to overflowing. The wheat drank deep, straightening from its drought-stressed slump, turning green again. Not all of it. They'd lost maybe 2 acres worth, but the rest survived. In September, they harvested. Back-breaking work that left them both hobbling, but the yield was better than expected. Not enough to make them rich, would never be enough for that, but enough to pay back Henderson's sons, enough to buy next year's seed, enough to prove that the land could give if you gave enough back. They sold the grain at the mill in town. The miller was fair, didn't try to cheat them the way Walter had half expected. Just weighed it honest, paid them honest, and wished them luck with next year's crop. Walking back to the wagon, money in his pocket, Walter felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind. Not the kind that required everything to be perfect. Just the quiet knowledge that tomorrow was possible, and the day after that, and the day after that. Small hope. Farmer's hope. The kind that kept people alive on the frontier. October brought the first frost. They spent the days preparing for winter, splitting wood, repairing the barn roof where it had started to leak, stocking the root cellar with vegetables from the small garden Ronan had planted behind the house. The work was familiar now, comfortable. They'd developed a rhythm, an understanding of who did what, when, and how to work together without getting in each other's way. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the ridge, Walter spoke. "I'm happy." Ronan looked at him. "You say that like it's a surprise." "It is. Didn't think I would be again, after Sarah, after the fire. Seemed like happiness was for younger men with fewer regrets. And now? Now I think maybe happiness is just this. Sitting on a porch you built yourself, watching a sunset, knowing tomorrow you'll do it all again. That's a low bar. Maybe, but it's mine." They sat in silence as the light faded. The wheat fields were stubble now, cut and harvested. In spring they'd plant again. The cycle continuing, indifferent to human drama. "Ronan?" Walter said eventually. "Yeah? I'm glad you stayed. Me too." November came with its bitter winds. They celebrated nothing. Neither of them cared much for holidays without family to share them with. But on Thanksgiving, Ronan produced another bottle of whiskey. "Where do you keep finding these?" Walter asked. "I have my sources." They drank to survival, to stubbornness, to the strange grace of second chances. "You know what I've learned?" Walter said, whiskey warming his chest. "People talk about courage like it's charging into gunfights or facing down villains. But that's not the hard part. The hard part is what comes after, getting up the next morning, rebuilding, choosing to try again when failure is almost certain. That's wisdom talking. That's age talking. Wisdom is just accumulated stupidity. You survived." Ronan laughed, really laughed. The sound filled the small house, pushed back the darkness, reminded Walter that joy still existed even for old, broken men with more past than future. "To accumulated stupidity," Ronan said, raising his glass. "To surviving it," Walter replied. They clinked glasses, drank, sat in the warmth of their small, imperfect home while winter pressed against the walls. December brought heavy snows again. They were ready this time, food stored, wood split, animals sheltered. They spent the short days maintaining what needed maintaining and the long evenings by the fire. Ronan had taken to carving. Small things, utensils, decorative pieces. A new frame for Sarah's photograph. His hands, scarred from violence, creating instead of destroying. Walter watched him work one night, lamplight catching on the curved wood, highlighting Ronan's concentration. What are you making? A box. For storing seeds. Figured we'd need it, come spring. That's practical. I'm trying practical instead of dramatic. It's harder. Most worthwhile things are. The box took shape over several evenings. When Ronan finished, he carved something on the lid. 2 names. Walter Hayes, Ronan Creed. Partnership, Ronan said, showing him. Figured it was official now. Walter traced the letters with his scarred fingers. Partnership, I like that. On Christmas Eve, snow falling heavy outside, they sat by the fire with coffee instead of whiskey. Getting too old for regular drinking, both of them. The hangovers lasted longer than the buzz. You got any regrets? Walter asked. Thousands. Any you'd change if you could? Ronan thought about it. No, they all led here, and here's not bad. No, it's not. They lapsed into comfortable silence. The fire crackled, the wind howled, the house held firm. This was peace, not perfect, not uncomplicated, but real. The kind of peace that had to be earned through fire and blood and stubborn refusal to quit. The kind worth fighting for. New Year came quietly. No celebration, just the acknowledgement that they'd survived another trip around the sun. Not a small thing at their age. In January, Walter woke one morning feeling different. Tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. He didn't mention it to Ronan. Didn't want to worry him. Probably just the cold, the season, the accumulated weight of hard years. But the tiredness persisted. By February, he couldn't hide it anymore. You need to see the doctor, Ronan said. I'm fine. You're not. You can barely make it through morning chores without stopping to rest. I'm 64. That's normal. No, it's not. We're seeing the doctor. They rode to town through February slush. The doctor examined Walter thoroughly, asked questions, listened to his heart with instruments that looked like they belonged in a torture chamber. Finally, he sat back. Your heart's wearing out, Mr. Hayes. It happens. You've lived hard, worked hard. It's catching up. How long? Walter asked. Could be years, could be months. No way to know. But you should take it easier. Less physical labor. More rest. I have a farm. You have help. Let him do the heavy work. On the ride back, Ronan said nothing. Just drove the wagon, jaw tight, processing. I'm not dead yet, Walter said. I know. And I'm not stopping work. I'll slow down, but I'm not becoming useless. Didn't ask you to. They rode in silence the rest of the way. That night, Walter found Ronan in the barn, standing in the dark, not doing anything, just standing. You okay? Walter asked. I should be asking you that. I'm old and dying, same as everyone eventually. That's not comfort. Wasn't meant to be, it's just truth. Ronan turned to face him. I spent 30 years watching you from a distance. I don't want to do that again. Don't want to stand at another grave wondering if I did enough. You did more than enough. You stayed. You fought. You helped rebuild. That's everything. It doesn't feel like everything. Walter moved closer, put his hand on Ronan's shoulder. Listen to me. We don't get to choose how much time we have. We just get to choose what we do with it. And I choose to spend whatever's left working this land with you, not worrying about the end, just living until I can't anymore. That's a hard way to look at it. It's the only way that makes sense. They stood together in the barn, 2 old men facing mortality with the same stubborn defiance they'd faced everything else. Spring came again. Walter worked lighter duties, planning, directing, managing the details while Ronan handled the physical labor. It chafed, being limited, but he adapted, always adapting. They planted 8 acres this time. The wheat came up stronger than last year, benefiting from improved soil and learned experience. Henderson's advice had been sound, and they'd listened. Learning from others. Another form of adaptation. In May, Walter had a bad spell. His heart stuttered, left him breathless and gray. Ronan got him inside, sat with him until it passed. "We're getting you back to the doctor," Ronan said. "It passed. I'm fine." "You're not fine, and I'm not losing you to stubbornness." The doctor confirmed what they both knew. Walter's heart was failing, slowly but definitely. More rest, less stress, all the things that were impossible on a working farm. "How long?" Ronan asked. "Months, most likely. Maybe into next year if he's lucky and careful." They rode home in silence again. That night, Ronan made dinner while Walter sat at the table, hating the helplessness. "I'm sorry," Walter said. "For what?" "For dying. For leaving you alone here." Ronan set down the spoon he'd been stirring with, came and sat across from Walter. "You're not leaving me alone. You're leaving me with this." He gestured around the house, with everything we built, with the knowledge that it's possible to come back from being broken. That's not nothing. It feels like abandonment. It's life, and I've had more time with you these past 2 years than I had any right to expect. That's gift enough. Walter's eyes burned. He blinked hard. "Thank you. For everything." "Same." They sat together while dinner cooked, while the light faded, while the wheat outside grew toward harvest. Summer passed in a golden haze. Walter grew weaker, but slowly. Still able to sit on the porch, still able to offer advice, still able to be present even if not active. The wheat harvest was good, better than the previous year. Ronan handled most of it, hiring Henderson's sons for the heavy work. They got it in before the storms came, sold it fair, made enough to expand next year, if there was a next year for both of them. In August, Walter asked Ronan to take him to Sarah's grave. They walked up the hill slowly, Walter leaning heavy on Ronan's arm. The stone was weathered now, letters soft but readable. "I'll be with you soon," Walter said to the stone, to Sarah, to memory. "You did good," Ronan said, "both of you. Built something that lasted." "Will you put me next to her?" "Of course." "And will you visit?" "Sometimes." "Every week, just like I did when she was alone." Walter managed a smile. Consistent, if nothing else. They stood there a while longer, then walked back down. Slow steps, measured breaths, making the most of what remained. September brought this kind of weather that made the frontier bearable. Cool nights, warm days, skies so blue they hurt to look at. Walter spent his days on the porch watching Ronan work, offering commentary and corrections. "You're doing it wrong," he called out one afternoon. "How can I be doing it wrong? The fence is standing." "Doesn't mean it's right." Ronan walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You're the worst supervisor I've ever had. I'm the only supervisor you've ever had." "That explains it." Despite everything, the weakness, the dying, the knowledge that time was running out, Walter laughed, real laughter, the kind that came from joy instead of bitterness. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "Did what?" "All of it. The fighting, the rebuilding, the partnership. I'm glad we didn't give up." Ronan sat down on the porch steps. "Me too." In late September, Walter had another spell. Worse this time. He collapsed in the house, couldn't get up. Ronan carried him to bed, sent for the doctor. The doctor came, examined him, shook his head. "It's time, Mr. Hayes. Days, maybe. Not long." After the doctor left, Ronan sat beside the bed. "I don't want to die," Walter said quietly. "I know. But I'm not afraid of it either. That's strange. Maybe that's wisdom, real wisdom, not the accumulated stupidity kind." Walter smiled weakly. "Maybe." They sat in silence. The house creaked around them. Outside, autumn was doing its work, changing the world from green to gold. "Will you be okay?" Walter asked. "After?" "Eventually, not right away, but eventually." "Good. That's good. The farm will keep. I'll make sure of it." "I know you will." Walter closed his eyes, opened them again. "Ronan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for coming to the door, finally. Thank you for leaving it open." Walter died 2 days later, in the early morning, with Ronan sitting beside him. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of death that frontier men rarely got but sometimes earned. Ronan buried him next to Sarah, on the hill overlooking the farm. He carved a stone similar to hers, simple and honest. Walter Hayes, good man, better friend, 1833 to 1897. He stood at the grave for a long time, hat in hand, saying goodbye to the man who'd given him a second chance at living. Then he walked back down to the house, to the farm, to the work that would continue because that's what Walter had wanted. That's what they'd both wanted. The land was still stubborn, still difficult, still demanded more than it gave. But Ronan had learned something these past years. About persistence, about partnership, about the quiet courage of choosing to try again every single morning despite impossible odds. He wasn't alone anymore, wasn't watching from the trees, wasn't hiding from life. He was living it, and that, he thought, was what redemption looked like. Not dramatic, not perfect, just real work, real effort, real presence. He planted that next spring, 8 acres again, using what Walter had taught him, what Henderson had advised, what the land itself had revealed. The wheat came up strong, and on warm evenings, Ronan sat on the porch and imagined conversations with the 2 people buried on the hill, told them about the day, about the crops, about the small victories and persistent challenges. Sometimes he could almost hear Walter's voice offering corrections. Sometimes he could almost hear Sarah's laugh. Mostly he just sat in the quiet, content with the life he'd finally allowed himself to live. The frontier didn't forgive, and it didn't forget. But sometimes, if you were stubborn enough, brave enough, lucky enough, it gave you something else. A chance to build, a chance to belong, a chance to transform old sins into new soil and grow something worth leaving behind. And that, Ronan thought as the sun set over land that would outlast them all, was grace enough for any man.